Welcome to the Diverse Minds podcast, where we give you the tips, tools and techniques you need to be a mentally healthy and inclusive leader. Each week, you'll hear about a variety of topics linked to mental health, well-being and diversity that will enhance both your professional practice and personal well-being.
Welcome to the 69th episode of the Diverse Minds podcast. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about how real, authentic and genuine race allyship can really make a difference in the workplace and why it's needed. If you listened to the show last week, episode 68, I talked about how to stop feeling scared or to still feeling scared about having a conversation about race. So this week, I thought it would be useful to go into more depth about creating genuine systemic change for staff of colour, global majority and black staff. Needless to say, it's been a really intense week on the equality, diversity and inclusion front, particularly conversations about training, with the government stating that the civil service will no longer have unconscious bias training and in fact that they mustn't spend money on it as it's seen as a waste of money and time. Liz Truss, Government Equalities Minister, delivered her speech on equality which was not particularly favourable and has started a lot of speculation and conversation about the repeal of the Equality Act 2010. And some of you who are on Twitter might have seen the hideous abuse that Gardener James Wong received when he was talking about horticultural institutions and how they needed to examine the legacy of racism, colonialism, how plants were brought from other countries, the word native species, exotic species, etc. And this completely being taken out of context and him being accused of saying that gardening was racist, which he absolutely didn't say. And I think he's just dealt with it so beautifully. When I had a look at his Twitter page and the way he's retweeted a lot of hatred that he's received and kind of myth busted in his responses. And every week there's something, right? So in this episode, I wanted to explore more about the term allyship. What does it really mean and how can it really shift those power imbalances that we see in the workplace? And it is important that we do more than to just understand. Now, understanding, of course, is a big part of the journey, but it's about taking action and knowing that allyship is crucial. And a week ago, you may have seen that Lloyds Bank released data. They were the only organisation to do so on their ethnicity pay gap. And it found that black workers earned, wait for it, a fifth less than their white colleagues. And I've included the link to the BBC article in the show notes. But in essence, black staff make up 1.5% of Lloyd's total workforce, which is shocking, and only 0.6% of its senior management. And their chief executive, Antonio Horta Osorio, has said that's not good enough, and they have resolved to take action. So Lloyds has actually pledged to increase the number of black staff in senior roles to at least 3% by 2025 to bring it in line with the black population in England and Wales. And as I mentioned, Lloyds is the first major UK bank to reveal its ethnicity pay gap. So these figures were compiled in April and they showed that the median pay gap between black staff and their colleagues was 19.7%, which is bigger than the gender pay gap. And the bonus pay gap stood at 37.6%. And in total, global majority staff of colour made up 10.3% of all staff at Lloyds and 7.3% of senior management. So there's clearly a difference in terms of black staff and other global majority staff. And the median pay gap between all staff of colour and their colleagues was 14.8%, while the bonus pay gap stood at 32.5%. And for Asian employees, the median pay gap stood at 25.7% and the bonus pay gap at 34.2%. So still stark figures. And alongside the publication, they've actually launched a race action plan. And this has been led by a Black Business Advisory Committee. Most global majority groups actually earn less on average than white British people in 2019, and that's according to the Office for National Statistics. And the median hourly pay gap was worse for Pakistani residents or Pakistani British people at 16%, while it stood at 15% for Bangladeshis and citizens that identify as African. The median hourly pay gap between global majority groups and white British workers stood at 2.3%. So this is meant to be the narrowest level since 2012, having having risen to 8.4% in 2014. I think it's going to be very interesting to see what the stats are in April 2021 for the preceding year, so for 2020, given the economic downturn and everything that's been happening. The other source of data I want to mention was Stylist launched in October the Black British Women Census. And they launched a survey that asked over 500 readers across the country questions and around being a black woman, around the workplace. And they found that more than 82% of black British women have to go out of their way to find stories that reflect their experience. That 74% have difficulty finding positive narratives about black women in the media, and just 11% felt that the government is doing enough to support black women. So there are huge gaps there. It also found that 70% of black women said that the beauty industry does not feel inclusive, and I think I can absolutely see that, and I'm surprised that figure's not higher. 2/3 of the women surveyed said that dating as a black woman in the UK is very difficult. And 65% of black women who responded think representation in the media is the most likely area to see positive change in the next year. And 95% of black women who responded to this survey in the UK have experienced racial discrimination. So these are, shocking and stark figures. And it's, again, as I mentioned in last week's podcast episode, it's crucial for us to be talking about this in the workplace. But it can feel tricky about where the line is between doing things in a genuine way and when does it become stepping on someone's toes or a particular community's toes and taking over and being a saviour. I just wanted to then give a bit of context around what allyship is. And I think one of the key things with allyship, it is about acknowledging your own race and privilege. Even those of us who are from communities of colour, who are not black, we need to acknowledge that our journey is going to be different to our black colleagues. The second thing is about listening. And you know that I talk about this a lot when I talk about mental health and well-being. And it's listening not with the intent to respond. It's not listening to solutionize. It is just listening. We might not have the answers. In fact, we probably won't. But after someone has spoken to us to say, that's awful, that's really terrible, or I'm here to listen if you want to talk again. What would you like me to do? Is there any way I can help you? Do you want to discuss options and choices you have once they've talked about everything? And never underestimate how powerful listening actually is, because it's not very often we get a chance to speak, particularly about issues of racism, mental health, mental ill health, suffering, trauma, very freely. People like to interrupt and they like to tell us what to do. So don't forget that. The third thing is to be very mindful of intersectionality, and I don't use that as a buzzword, but of course we're more than just our race. We have a socioeconomic background, we have a family culture, we have an age, we have a gender, we have a gender identity, we might belong to the LGBTQIA plus community or communities, we may have a disability, we may not have a disability. So there's so much to it which again will impact on our experience of race and racism. It's also important not to brush over any racism or racist incidents, no matter how trivial or small they might seem to you. Remember, everyone has different thresholds and everyone has a different lived experience. So what might seem very inoffensive to you could be incredibly offensive and upsetting to someone else. And just acknowledge that. And it's really important to not put your lens on it. Also understanding that one person cannot represent the plurality of views. So there isn't one or the Black experience. There isn't one or the South Asian experience. Of course, if you have a staff network or staff groups or employee resource networks, if there is a discussion and someone's nominated as a spokesperson to talk about that, that's one thing. But to say, oh, we have a senior Black vice president or senior Black board member, oh, and they have a great time, they think the company's really good, that doesn't reflect the experiences of all the other Black staff members through all the grades and roles that are available in a particular organisation, who will bring with them their own lived experience and have their own journey and lens. So that's absolutely crucial to be clear on that. Learning about the history of whiteness and division. And recently I was asked a question about, often South Asian communities can be very racist. And, I've been trying to talk about this more, and that's absolutely true. And a lot of that division or that thinking from South Asian communities has also come from the history of whiteness and division through colonization, through creating systems where light skin was favored. So we all need to learn about that and how we play into that and what we can do to challenge that. Even if we don't consider ourselves white, we don't identify as being white, we absolutely need to learn about it too, to be allies to other colleagues, even if we identify as being from global majority diaspora backgrounds. Calling out negative and damaging behaviour, so being an active bystander, or more often you might hear the term now as upstander, and making sure that you know your strategies. Do you want to challenge it directly? Do you want to stop an exchange in the moment if you can and it's safe to do so? If you feel you can't, who could you delegate that to? And also you could delay something. So you might have seen something and a week later you think, actually, I can't let that go. Thinking about the choices and the ways in which to do that. So the 4 Ds. Also being able to have a conversation with someone and tell them that how that comment was negative or impactful, or how it could have been damaging in a professional way. Potentially having conversations with your friends and family about race and race equality. And I think this one is super challenging because you don't have the boundaries and the professional standards that you do in the workplace. And that can be incredibly difficult. And of course, to take that constant and consistent action. Now, some of you, I'm sure, will be listening and could run a marathon without training. But for most people, we have to do the work and we have to go out running. We have to plan, even if it's a 5K or a 1 mile run. And taking that constant, consistent action with our physical health, our mental health, our healthy eating, with our continuing professional development in our jobs. And it's exactly the same with understanding the context of race and this term allyship, whether it sits comfortably with you or not. We have to take constant and consistent action, but also be aware that we will make mistakes, and for that not to stop us or perturb us, but to apologize, understand what went wrong, move on, and to keep going. And I think by doing that, some of those things, it does make a difference. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the 5 types of allyship. And this is adapted from a paper by Salter, Nicholas, Migliaccio, and Leslie in 2019. And it's called Allyship as a Diversity and Inclusion Tool in the Workplace. And it talks about a few more types, but these were the 5 ones I really wanted to pick out, and some might resonate with you more than others. So the first one is the advocate. So the advocate works to get others to support the equality, diversity and inclusion agenda. And particularly today, we're focusing on race and race equality and raise awareness across an organisation. So the advocate will use power to help amplify the voices of others. And when I use the word power, it's not necessarily about seniority. That could be an aspect of power. But someone who has a lot of access to people in an organisation, so that's often the person who will work at the front desk or reception or greet people, that person actually does have a lot of power. It could be someone who's been in an organisation for a long time and so knows how the institution works inside out. So think about power in the broadest way and how we all have some kind of power. The second one is the scholar. So that's someone who actively seeks to learn, unlearn and relearn what they know. And that might resonate with many of you. And in the workplace, the scholar seeks to understand the experiences and challenges their colleagues encounter. Thirdly, the sponsor. So that's someone who will use their internal political and social capital to move careers forward. So you might have heard the term sponsorship or sponsorship programs. And a good sponsor will speak about staff of colour, global majority staff positively behind those closed doors. And they provide visibility and endorsement of work that may go unseen, as well as access to their networks. The fourth type is the upstander. So I mentioned that in relation to active bystanding or upstanding. And that's a person who speaks out or intervenes on behalf and in support of someone when they see or hear something is wrong, no matter how small the act or word is perceived to be. And then fifthly, the champion. This is someone who helps provide opportunities, raises the flag, waves the flag of visibility for staff who don't usually receive it. So there might be links here to the sponsor, but the champion might be in a broader way, not just necessarily related to someone's specific job role. It could be that they're raising the flag for them to speak about things they know about or things that they do in their personal time that could be of benefit to the organisation. They could also recommend staff of colour, global majority staff, for opportunities such as speaking, projects, boards externally, or connect them to people. And it might just be in a one-off way, so it might not be in such a relationship-based way as sponsorship could be. There's some ideas about allyship, so the 5 different types, and you might like to think about which ones resonate with you more, which areas you might want to cultivate, also bearing in mind there are more faces of allyship. And so why do we need to do this? I think one of the key things is if there are no visible sponsors or champions in particular, or allies in a general way, who will support this perceived outspokenness or this perceived presence of staff of colour, it's very hard to put that onus on global majority Black staff of colour. Confidence is therefore eroded and it's easier to keep our heads down. And of course, every organisation has great aims and objectives, but this won't necessarily match our global majority of staff of colour experiences. And it's by understanding the barriers that others encounter that the system can be altered to equalise the playing field. And also that global majority staff are much more likely to be offered mentoring opportunities. Now, of course, if staff want that, they should be able to have a mentoring opportunity, but it's often not mentoring that's the issue. It's not about advice, it's not about support, it's not about imposter syndrome. It's actually, let's get that door open, let's get that door kicked down so people's talents are recognised. And the problem is that because there have been historical barriers to career progression, this means that high potential Black employees, Black global majority staff of colour struggle to get on the radar of influential senior professionals. And one of my colleagues talks about a mean girl culture for entrepreneurs on social media. And in a way there is that, it's that in the social media space, and it absolutely happens in the workplace too. So as a result, racially diverse talent is often overlooked and seen as high risk because it's not the kind of faces that many organisations are used to seeing at a senior level, and it feels like they're an unknown quantity. They're not part of the old boys network, the usual faces. So talking about race inequity and bringing this to the fore and the experience that global majority Black staff of colour face is an important part of being an ally for race. And there are lots of benefits in terms of business benefits, the reputation and sector leading status. I think most employers are very fearful of bad reviews on Glassdoor, for example, as one review site for former employees or current employees. So this is really important, and it fosters a collaborative environment for all, and it promotes diversity of thought and style to address those future challenges, which I think we're aware of that there are going to be many. It also develops a really good line of succession and a different kind of way of thinking about talent and knowledge transfer. And it creates opportunities for realising equity and inclusion for all staff and potential organisational progression. So a question for you then is, maybe some of this is what you're doing already, but what, if anything, do you find challenging about your journey to becoming or being a race equality ally? What is the thing that overwhelms you the most or you find particularly challenging? Now, I hope this has been useful to you, and as always, I've included the form in terms of training. If you would like to think about this more, you can complete the form to help you shape your ideas. And remember that this is a journey and we won't always get there very quickly. And if you can start on this journey and really consider what you can do and how to make changes, you'll find that there are measurable benefits for individuals, the organisation as a whole, and of course yourself. Because when we engage in work like this, we learn immensely, and it's a very rich and fruitful experience. So allyship has to be genuine, it has to be real. It does take work and effort. It's not a one and done, one of my favourite phrases, but about taking constant, consistent action, acknowledging mistakes, apologising, moving on. That there'll be times where you feel fearful, and that's okay. Think about the types of allyship you could employ in different contexts, and remember the overarching benefits for the organisation. And don't forget, if you want to know more about how I can help, please use the form. The link is in the show notes. And I've also included a link to Business in the Community's Race Allyship Toolkit, which you might find really useful, as well as links to other podcasts. So I really look forward to seeing you in the next episode, the final episode for 2020. Wow, can't believe many of us have made it to this point. And if you enjoyed the show, why not leave me a review on Apple Podcasts? And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode where I review what 2020 has taught me.
Thanks for listening to the Diverse Minds podcast. Don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you access your podcasts from. You can also connect with me on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Tune into next week's episode of the podcast, where I'll bring you more insights on mental health and inclusion. Bye for now.